hopefully it won't go out like it did Sunday. Kept going away. So. All right. All righty. So let's start this evening. Father, we come to you. We thank you so much, Father, for just your grace, your love that you've given to each and every one of us as we come together tonight to learn more about you and, Father, more about your creation. And God, we just understand that you have made us. But God, we also understand that in times of uncertainty as we're going through now, Father, there are so many things that are going so many different directions that we need to depend more and more upon you. Father, the ones that are sick, that are hurting, Father, the things that are going wrong, that we just ask and pray, Father, that we know you're in control, but help us, Father, to just depend on you more than anything else. For we ask it in thy Son, Jesus' name. Amen. All right, so we have been talking about angels, right? If you remember, last week we were talking about angels, and actually when they were seen a few times, for instance, when you saw them with, we talked about when with Abraham and Sarah, they were actually three men, that they could actually see them. They were not an apparition. They were real. They were there. And then you see through the Bible angels appearing to people, and they are real, not apparitions. And we talked about and described that so many times when you see pictures of angels, they're in these beautiful white robes, and they're absolutely gorgeous and everything else. But yet, that's only a couple of them. Because when you start understanding through the scriptures, when it starts describing them, for instance, having, you had the couple that do have 2 wings, but you have others which have 4 wings. The 2 that are basically to cover their chest, and then 2 that will cover their feet. And then you see other angels which basically had 6 wings to cover their chest, 2 to fly, cover the feet. But then they also had 4 faces so that they could actually look in every direction. And then you also saw that on these angels that their whole body were covered with eyes. And so they're all seeing all the time, constantly seeing. And so as we talked about, Elijah had been taken up in a chariot, but he had also seen that a chariot of fire had come, and there were some split through there. But then when you see Elisha looking, when he was complaining that he was the only one left, and where is everybody? And God opened his eyes. And when he opened his eyes, he basically saw all around him angels with chariots of fire. And so when you think about it, angels with chariots of fire, there's some type of vehicle or whatever that you want to call it, but they are actually used part of God's creation to maneuver and go from place to place. Also, as we were talking about in the book of Job, when Job was there, everything's going fine with Job, everything's great, everything's wonderful with Job. He actually was recorded, they really believe that he was the richest man in the whole world. And actually they believe that Job is actually the first book of the Bible it's the oldest book in the Bible. From not historical point of view, but the oldest one that was written. That he actually, uh, when you read the Bible, you have to understand it's not in chronological order. Okay? Chronological? Because the way they kind of laid out the Bible, you lay it out as the Torah, or the Torah. You lay it out as the book of Torah or book of law. So they have the first 5 books of the book of Moses, which basically starts from the beginning of time and then going forward to cover these periods of time. Okay, from there, then from there, you have the books of history, which basically will after the book of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, Deuteronomy. After the book of Deuteronomy, then when you start getting into Kings and Chronicles and those books, those will be the books of history. Okay, so it's a historical view of Israel. And then you'll have the books of poetry, which is basically like Psalms and stuff. Then you will have the minor prophets and the major prophets. It's the 5 sections of the Bible that I believe that will hit all 39 of those books that are there. And it's basically the same way as you go into the New Testament. It isn't necessarily in a chronological order. As a matter of fact, I could probably go get it. I actually have a Bible in my office that is a chronological Bible. And it goes from, it's weird trying to read it because you're sitting there trying to find a verse and you might as well forget it. You're not going to find the verse. You just have to read the Bible, from point A to point B. So anyway, we were talking about Job. If you remember, when Satan came, it said when Satan came to present himself, when the sons of God came to present themselves, which are the angels, and sometimes people do not understand that angels are constantly communicating with God. Their whole being right now is basically to do whatever it is that God wants them to do. And most of that is taking care of us, keeping us safe. Yes, they are his soldiers. And so what happens is that some people do not understand is that Satan cannot be everywhere. He is not omnipresent like God. He also is not omniscient. He is not all-knowing. Okay, he knows the end. Okay, but he has to get permission from God to do anything whatsoever to us. And so what I was sharing with some people is this. Satan has one-third of the angels that fell are Satan's, but there is a small number of them, and I forget the exact number, that are basically did something very, very wrong, that God said, you are not going to do this ever again. You did it once, that's it, you're done. And they basically are in a holding place right now that they will stay in until the day of judgment. Once the day of judgment it's come for the end of time and everything is done and finished and everything, and God is judged, those angels will be brought out of there and sent straight to hell. They were the worst of the worst. Whatever they did was the worst of the worst. And God said, I will never, ever let you do this again, whatever it was. There's a whole bunch of speculation as to what it was. We don't know, okay? We can always speculate. But if you remember when Satan came and presented himself with the angels, he says, he says, have you considered my servant Job? And he says, I can't get to him because you have him hedged in. Sharon, did you ever think about, as we were talking about the angels, that had the four, that basically had the four faces to be able to see everywhere. Remember how they were described that they would touch wings. And so basically what you would have would be a square. So think about it a minute. God says that he's going to take care of us. And if God had Job hedged in, don't you think that he can do that again? And don't you think that maybe he does do that again? That God sometimes has us hedged in so that Satan cannot get to us? So many times people think, well, I've got a guardian angel, I've got 2 angels. Maybe you've got 4. And you're in the middle of it. And they are there to protect you, to fight against the power of Satan. Because Satan is generally not the one that's coming after you. Okay? Because he can't be everywhere. So I hear this all the time. Satan's really trying to get to me. No, his demons are trying to get to you. Because he has gone to God to get permission to do something to you. And so he also has his demons that have fallen that are taking orders from him. And so basically he's going over here to angel number 1 and saying, okay, angel number 1, I have gotten permission to do this to Dave Gibbs. Here's what I need you to do. Or I've got permission to go to Jim or Tracy or whatever. And so they will come to you or against you based upon his orders. Because he can't do everybody. He can only be in one spot, one place. He can't go against everybody at the same time. So he has his army. And it's remember what he's doing. He is trying to imitate God all along. And sometimes we forget about what he's trying to do. He's trying to elevate himself exactly like God. So he's seeing, oh, hey, God's doing this, so I'll do the same thing. I'm going to set myself up to imitate what he's doing. And so sometimes we forget. So we saw later on in the book of Kings, in the book of Psalms, and then in the book of Revelation, it talks about angels with chariots and horses. And they're coming. So here's the deal. And so many times, if you've ever gone back into history and you look at history and you find these, what do I want to call it? They go into some of these caves, mountains, and on the walls, things are drawn. There are pictures that are drawn. There are carvings and everything. And they'll call it hieroglyphics, okay, which are, and they're thousands of years old, okay? And if you've ever seen some of these hieroglyphics, some of these hieroglyphics actually look like flying saucers. Now, if you go in there and you look, and when they look at these flying saucers, some of the pictures of the people that they see really look weird and strange. And people are trying to decide, okay, what is this? Have you ever thought for a minute that what an angel would look like to someone and trying to describe that? Exactly. There's a lot of times that you've got people that say, oh, we have aliens from another planet and everything. And you've got to understand something, okay? So many times we want to just disassociate ourselves from there. There's no way. There is no other life on another planet. And the question is, life as what? Life as we know it? Because there are angels out there. And they have come to visit. And if they have come to visit before, God says, I am the same yesterday, today, and forever. And he also gives us a scripture that says to us to be careful because there are times that you will entertain angels unaware. Which says that that there is the possibility today that you could be visited by an angel just like Elijah was, just like Mary was when she was told that she was going to have a child, just like Joseph was when he was told, hey, don't divorce her, don't put her away, because that child that she's going to have is not from another man, it's of God. You have it. Just as the angel came to Joseph and said, you need to get out of town because Herod wants to kill you. It's going to, wants to kill your son. You need to go to Egypt. Just as 2 years later, the angel comes to Joseph and says, okay, Joseph, now it's time to go home. Just as the angels, thousands of angels or hundreds of angels or whatever that were in chariots that were telling Elijah, hey, here's an army. You don't think I'm going to take care of you? I've got an army of angels. And just as we know that the Bible tells us when Jesus was on the cross that God had 6 legions of angels waiting just for his beckoning call, that if he said that he couldn't do this, that God was going to send these angels down there to get his son, and that was going to be it. He was going to annihilate everything. I think it's somewhere close to about 1,200, if I remember right. A legion was either 1,200 or 1,000. It's somewhere in that fashion. So that's where they get sometimes where he could have called 10,000 angels. And so if he could have done that, he would have. But sooner or later, it's going to be more than 6 legions when they all come back, and we're all going to fight against Satan and the forces of evil and to overcome them. And so sometimes what ends up happening is there are times that we basically will disown the thought that no, there isn't any aliens. Where are the angels at? Because it's in a book, Reader's Digest book. It's called the Strange Stories and Amazing Facts, and there is basically 4 pages in there that basically will define and talk about UFOs and how that they have been seen, not just by one person, but a lot of times, you think about it, they have been seen by astronauts. They came out just a few months ago, late last year, where these, it's either, I think it was Navy pilots were flying. And it wasn't just one, it was 2. And they were flying, and they called back to the tower and said, hey, here. And they had pictures showing of this apparatus that they didn't know what it was, that basically was just like a speck and hovering, but then the next thing you know, they're trying to calculate the speed of it, and there's nothing on this earth that goes at that speed. Nothing on this earth that can go at that speed and turn on a dime. And people will say, there's no such thing. Well, hold on a minute. If God is sending his angels, how do we know what he's sending them in? We sometimes, a lot of people say, oh, well, that's not science. No, it's God. God can do whatever he wants to do to send his angels to do whatever they need to do for us. And if that's the way God wants to do that, and as a matter of fact, I don't know about you all, but I think that an angel can fly past the speed of light. I mean, because I have no idea where God is, but I know one thing: the angels said it took him 21 days to get here, and part of it he was fighting, And so you're thinking about it. He's fighting, because the Bible teaches us, as Paul and John both were saying, that they were caught up into the third heavens. Wherever that third heaven is, where God is. And so his angels are there, and they're coming from there to here. And they can be seen. And so you think about it, if they're coming and very quickly, wouldn't it look like a light? And don't think I'm going off my rocker, because I'm not. Because if you remember, the sermon Sunday on 2 Timothy 1:7 says that he has given me a sound mind. And sometimes we throw away these things. We just basically, we say, well, oh no, I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. I don't believe in that. But yet at the same time, it is very probable and very possible that this is what everybody's seeing. And you think about it for a moment, is because whatever God wants to do, God can do. He don't need our permission, and whether we believe in it or not, he's still doing it. And he's still capable of doing this. And so sometimes, instead of arguing with people, and saying, well, no, I just don't buy that. Say, hey, let me give you what I think that yes, I'll agree with you wholeheartedly that there are, life, because there is. Because somewhere, someplace, people who are dying are going somewhere else. They're not here. And one of these days, they're coming back. He says, the dead in Christ shall rise first, and we which are alive and remain shall be caught up and changed in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye. Whatever that is, wherever it occurs, I have no clue. But I do know this, that at one point in time, every one of us are coming back to fight against Satan. So there's somewhere, someplace. Is there life out there? Absolutely. But it's not the kind of life they're thinking. It's totally different, because we're going to live eternally, in the creation that God has made, in all of these things. But let me give you just a couple of these things that's actually in here. Okay, the very first flying saucer was actually found, and it began in 1947. On June the 24th, there was a private pilot by the name of Kenneth Arnold, and he was looking for a missing air transport plane. Okay, and in this search, he actually saw 9 disc-shaped objects that were flying over Mount Rainier in Washington, the state of Washington, and he described them. He described these objects like this. He said they are as flying like a saucer would if you skipped it across the water. So what he was seeing was these 9 objects. They were not just flying this way. They were hit and skip, and he's seeing 9 of them. And he described them as a flying saucer. And nobody questioned what he saw, because of his reputation, of who he was. They didn't think, this guy's out of his tree. He's been flying too long, seeing some things and everything else. Okay? And so what ended up was, from that story that was picked up then on June the 24th, 1947, that's how it got the term flying saucers. And went forth, and so you've seen, what is it? It's Area 51, where they keep saying that they got all these aliens and all of this stuff, and everything that's going on. Okay, in June of 1965, and on Gemini 4, the astronaut named James McDivitt, he saw what he described as a cylindrical object, apparently with arms sticking out of it. And what he said it was like another spacecraft with an antenna. Okay, and he said that it appeared to be in a free drifting flight over the Pacific, something higher than their capsule. Okay, and he said that he noticed that it was moving in a path towards his own spacecraft, but closing in fast. Him and his other astronaut, and the Gemini, there were two, Edward White, they were trying to take evasive action because they thought the thing was flying right at them. And it said after splashdown, what they did was they took film of it. So they were filming it. And here's what he wrote. After splashdown, the film was taken away, and McDivitt did not see it again for several days. And when he did inspect the film, he said the object was hazily outlined against the sky, but he remained unalterably convinced it was a positive identification. It's almost like they took the film away and basically doctored. Okay? But what they found and what they tried to explain was that it was a satellite called Pegasus that was next to them. But they went back and looked, and the Pegasus satellite was 1,200 miles away from where they were at. And so trying to disown all of these things. And so a lot of times you're going to find that people will see, that things have happened. And in this thing from Reader's Digest, here's what it says. It says a total of about 26 astronauts have reported seeing UFOs while in orbit. Not one or two, 26 of them have seen something while they're out there. And so it's like, okay, here they are. And then, of course, you get these others who claim that they have been taken up by UFOs and then took somewhere and brought back. But so many times what you find is a lot of things that are happening. And then you've got other times when you've got people, which a lot of times people will make fun of because they're way out away from civilization and they're way out in the country somewhere. And you get these people that say, oh, we've seen these things out in our fields and all this stuff. And they keep trying to think, yeah, you've been smoking some of the stuff that you're growing, and telling them there's more like, but it's, but it's just a lot of times that things, happen. And so anyway, when you begin to look at this, it's like, how can anyone give a good explanation for what is being seen? Because you think about it for a moment, God is not hiding angels from us. He's let people see him all the way down through. I was talking to, somebody here recently, and we were talking, and they were talking about how they were somewhere, and where they were at, there was this elderly gentleman that was standing there talking to them about something, knew something about them, and then they turned around and turned back around, and he was gone. And it's like, where did he go? And I don't know if you've ever been in a situation where you've maybe seen someone, or maybe someone said something to you and you just kind of brush it off, and then you turn around and they're not there. And sometimes we need to understand some things, and that is this. God talks to us in many different ways, in many different venues. And sometimes we need to be careful just brushing things off as to no, that's not there. Because sometimes it's almost like saying, okay, God, you can't do this again. When God continues to say, I'm the same yesterday, today, and forever, and I don't change. If I did it back here for Abraham, I can do it for you too, if it needs to be. And there are some times that, these things that'll happen. So now we've gone from UFOs, so now let's start talking about the appearances of these angels and certain things that are about them. Go to Mark chapter 16 in verse number 5. And so let's kind of talk about the general appearances. We talked about the seraphim and the cherubim, and the distinction between the two. So now let's just talk about a general appearance of them, okay? In Mark chapter 16 and verse number 5. Sepulcher or sepulcher, some people will say it that way. Yeah. So this is when Jesus had died, buried and risen, and they're coming back now for him because they were going to anoint him, because it was in basically in his burial. If you remember, it said that they had to hurry up and get him down off of the cross, because it was going to be Passover. Passover was going to start at 6 p.m. Okay? And so if you look, and you will see that basically Jesus was put on the cross at 9, died at noon. Okay? And so here he is, he's dead at noon. And so they, being Jewish, had to get him, in order to do this, they had to get him off of there, or else he would have to hang there until after the Sabbath was over. Okay? So he would have had to hang there for 24 more hours. And to them, it was very important that he was, not to be hanging up there dead for everybody to mock him and everything else. So if you remember, Joseph of Arimathea and Nicodemus went to them and said, hey, can we have his body? Well, the problem is that basically in a Jewish preparal for burial, you would have to you had if you remember, when he came to the house of Mary and Martha, how she had anointed him with the oil, which he basically said this was the oil that actually they used to put on someone who died. Okay? Because they didn't embalm people, and so basically they would put this fragrance on them, which was very expensive. It was not some cheap perfume that you get at Odd Lots or Big Lots or whatever it's called. Okay? It costs a lot of money. And so they had to get him down real quick. And so they didn't have time to really prepare him for the burial that he was supposed to get. So they wrapped him up. They anointed, wrapped him up real quick, and then laid him in the tomb, waiting for when the Sabbath was over, and then they were going to come back, okay, to anoint him. And so here they come to where Jesus is at. They come to the sepulcher, or sepulcher, whichever you want to pronounce, and the stones rolled away. And they see a young man sitting on the right side, clothed in a long white garment, and they were affrighted. Coincidental.
On the right side of the entrance?
Yes.
Okay.
He was sitting on the right side. Isn't that kind of amazing? Because I'm going to say to those on my left, depart from me, ye workers of iniquity, because I never know you. To the one sitting on my right, because the right side was always, the right side was a place of honor. And he was sitting on the right side of there. Okay, so again, things are not by coincidence. Things are by divine design. He sits at the right side of the Father. That's why I keep trying to tell my brother Chico, who is left-handed, that he's not going to heaven. Go to Matthew chapter 28, verse number 3. Verse number 3. Yeah, his appearance, his countenance was like lightning. What's lightning like? Right. It's when it's dark. It's dark. It's stormy. And all of a sudden, as lightning appears, it basically will take and all brilliance of this will light up everything. You can, if you see a storm at midnight, a lot of times we see a storm in the middle of the day because we sleep. Storms are if I can use the word, a storm at midnight is almost like a good aphrodisiac to make it kind of like sleep. A lot of times, a lot of people love to sleep in a storm or just the sound of the rain. But then all of a sudden, you hear a big old clash of thunder. That, it's like, okay, I'm up now. But if you're sitting there watching this storm at midnight, it is dark. And then all of a sudden, the lightning strikes. And it's like everything gets lit up. And then your mind starts thinking, is that somebody out there? I see the shadow. But it's all of the brilliance that is of the night that you can see from that, from that flash of lightning. And here it says his countenance was like lightning. His raiment was white as snow. And again, it's the description is talking about pure, how pure his appearance was. But at the same time, not only was it pure, the brilliance off of there. And if you think about it for a moment, if you've got a bright light, what happens if you take that bright light and shine it on a white garment and a black garment? If you have a white garment and a black garment and you shine a light on that white garment and that black garment, something will happen. No, no. What happens is if you shine a light on a dark color, it absorbs the light. That is why when you go into like the desert and stuff, you don't wear black. The white will reflect the light. So if you've got a brilliance of him dressed in white, he's going to reflect more. Think about it. What did he say? That when Jesus comes, he's coming in all of his glory, and we're all going to get a black robe? No, we're getting a white robe to reflect the glory and the brilliance that is there. So when you see the angels, remember they're reflecting the brilliance and the glory of God. So when we get our white robe, it's going to help us to reflect throughout all of the universe the brilliance of God. I ain't going to need no sunglasses. It's going to be cool. Okay. Go to Luke chapter 24, verse number 4. Luke 24, 4. Uh-huh.
And it came to pass, as they were much perplexed thereabout, behold, two men stood by them in shining garments.
Yeah. So here comes Luke's version of this, where he says they got up early in the morning on the day after the Sabbath, come to the tomb, and when they did, they went in. They saw, okay. And so when you see here, it said they went in to the tomb, but they didn't find the body of Jesus, okay? And when they didn't find the body, they're looking around. They're perplexed. Hold on a minute. We know he was put here. We put him there. We followed, we watched, made sure everything was here. And contrary to popular belief, the Roman government did not put the stone in front of the tomb. His disciples put the stone in front of the tomb. They put the stone there to make sure that nobody could steal him. His followers. The Roman government, all they did was come back to that stone and sealed it like in a wax. So that, and they had the two guards that were watching the tomb to make sure that nobody could break in.
This says they were in shiny garments. Were they reflecting the angels?
Who?
In that verse. Oh, I'm sorry, I'm reading the one before it. The one before it says the two men stood by them in shining garments.
Yeah, suddenly two men. These were angels.
Those were angels.
Yes. So what you find is in Matthew. Remember, it said that when they came there, they saw a man sitting on the rock. There was one, but now they come inside, and while they're inside, it said while they were in. They found the stone rolled away. They went in and they did not find the body of Jesus. But while they were perplexed about this, suddenly two men stood by them. Nowhere. And the women, it said, they were, in verse number 5, the women were terrified and they bowed down to the ground. It was like, where is he? And then all of a sudden, boom, here, there's two men. And again, these two men are angels who were in dazzling clothes. Okay? Go to Revelation chapter 10 in verse number 1.
Saw another mighty angel come down from heaven, clothed with a cloud, and a rainbow was upon his head, and his face was as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire.
So as you begin to go into the book of Revelation, he's going to start describing some angels, different ones. One of them, he says here, is clothed with a cloud. Again, we think of clouds as what? White puffs of cotton. And he had a rainbow was upon his head, and his face as it were the sun, and his feet as pillars of fire. So he's beginning to describe all of these things. Revelation 15:16 says, and the seven angels came out of the temple, having the seven plagues, clothed in pure and white linen, having their breasts girded with golden girdles. Revelation 18:1 says, after these things I saw another angel come from heaven, having great power, and the earth was lightened with his glory. Now, I need you to go to Colossians chapter 2 and verse number 18. Yeah. So who would this be? They're worshiping angels, but who would they be? Who would these? This is basically a grouping of people. When it says, let nobody condemn you by delighting in ascetic practices in the worship of angels, claiming access to a visionary realm. Such people are in, huh? It could be palm readers, soothsayers, fortune tellers, or just plain people. There are people, and the one thing it talks about is by empty notions of their unspiritual mind. Who would be unspiritual? Unsaved. Exactly. There are unsaved people who worship angels. Okay? So angels are worshiped by unsaved people. Now also, please understand that demons are fallen angels. Okay? In this case, they are, because again, sometimes, and people, talk about this all the time. When people say, "How can I go?" And when I go to this person and they read my palm or they bring the cards out, how do they know so much about me?
Devils telling them everything.
They ask leading questions.
Huh? Yeah. Well, you think about it for a minute. If I am Satan and I'm going to God to ask God to tempt you or whatever else, Okay? And he says, well, have you considered my servant Job? Yeah, I've considered your servant Job, but I can't get to him. But if you'll drop the hedge, here's what I'll do. So how much does he know about Job? So let's go to the people who aren't saved. Because most of the time, the people that are going to fortune tellers and stuff are not saved individuals. Who knows more about them? He says you either worship one or the other, God or Satan.
So you think the fortune tellers and all them people are Satan's angels?
Oh, absolutely. And how do I know that? Go to the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, there is a young lady. And she was, there was a group of men that actually were using her because she was possessed by demons. And they were using her to basically tell people's future. And when the disciples came there, they saw this and they cast the demons out of her. And because they cast out the demons out of her, the men who owned her got very upset and said, how dare you? You have taken our source of income. And they basically wanted him killed, stoned, thrown in prison because of what they did. And sometimes people don't understand that there are some of these have the possibility of being demon possessed and being able to foretell the future because Satan already knows what he's going to do to you. Yeah. But with them, they learn the tarot cards or the cards, and each card means something, has a meaning to it. So basically they're learning what the meaning of the card is. And so what basically is they're turning the card over and saying, here's what this is going to happen to you. Yeah, it's like, no. It's like, you got this line here. Yeah, well, I got this line here because my wife stabbed me with a knife. So read that line and tell me what it is, you know. That's not a lifeline. I know. I'm very careful. Revelation chapter 19 and verse number 10. Uh, 19:10.
At this I fell at his feet to worship him, but he said to me, don't do that. I am a fellow servant with you. When your brothers and sisters who belong to the testimony of Jesus worship God, for even the spirit of prophecy bears testimony to Jesus.
Okay. So who is this that's talking in Revelation chapter 19, verse number 10? Then I fell at his feet to worship him, but he said, don't do that. Saved or unsaved? Okay. Saved, but who was it? Do you know? Book of Revelation. And you talk about John the Revelator. It's John. John, a saved individual, wanted to fall down and worship the angel. So angels weren't just worshipped by unsaved people, or also by saved people. Now, look at what he told John. This is John 19, okay? In John 19:10, he says, but he said, don't do that. I am a fellow servant with you and your brothers and sisters who hold firmly to the testimony of Jesus Christ. What does he say? Don't worship me, worship God. Okay? Because the testimony of Jesus is the spirit of prophecy. Okay? Now, go to Revelation chapter 22. 3 chapters later, verses 8 and 9. Twenty-two, 8 and 9.
I, John, saw these things and heard them. When I had heard and seen, I fell down to worship before the feet of the angel which showed me these things. Then saith he unto me, See thou do it not, for I am thy fellow servant, and of thy brethren the prophets, and of them which keep the saying of this book. Worship God.
Now, what you'll find in the book of Revelation between 19 and 22, this isn't a long extended period of time. It was like, boom, here's what I see. Boom, here's what I see. Boom, here's what I see. So this is in a very short period of time. First one was, I fell down at the feet of him to worship him. And he says, don't do that. He says, I am a fellow servant just like you. I work for God, just as you are a servant of God. I am a servant of God. And people need to understand, they are servants just like us, serving God. That's their purpose. Difference is, they're serving God and serving us, whereas we're serving God but not serving them. And he says, don't worship me. I'm just like you. And then he turns around in chapter 28 or 22, 3 chapters later, which is not a long period of time, the angel tells him something. And what does he do? I fell down at his feet to worship him, the one who told me this. And he's telling him, dude, I've told you once, get it into your thick skull. Second time, I'm only going to tell you this twice. Don't worship me. This is not what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to worship God. I mean, to me, I probably would have been there 28 times. Thinking, whoa, and because it is. You think of all of the things that John got to see. In the beginning, you're watching as Jesus is dictating to John what he wants him to write. He's giving him verbatim, word for word. Here's what I want you to write down and send these to the churches. And then all of a sudden now, Jesus is saying, come up here and let me show you some stuff. And so now what John's doing is writing firsthand experience of what's going to transpire. And he's trying to write it down into a way that he's describing things that he has never ever seen to people who are never going to see this until later on, maybe. Some of this we won't see. We're out of here. But there's going to be some other people that are going to be seeing this, and the angel is saying, okay, here's the first scroll. Here's the seal that Jesus broke, and here's what's going to happen. And he's seeing as the angel pours out, plague after plague after plague, of the things that are going to happen there. And he's trying to describe this. And he's trying to describe some things that he's going to see in the future that he has never ever seen before. But he's writing it to people that's going to come in the future. I mean, honestly, you think about it. How do you describe, for instance, how would you describe a rotary telephone even to your grandkids? They look at you like, what planet are you from? You know, this was when? In the 1960s? No, it was in the 1980s. I'm sorry, in the 70s and the 80s, we went from rotary to push button, right? Remember what?
Our phone in Middletown used to had called GA.
Yeah. Uh, it,
It stood for Gardner.
probably. In the GA was what, 4-1? Or G was ABC. Yeah. You always. Yeah. Yeah. No, in Hamilton, in Hamilton, you would call Twinbrook 51247 or something, and which was TW. So it would stood for Twinbrook, and if you go to Hamilton, you still have Twinbrook. You know, you have the Twinbrook on the west side of Hamilton. Yeah. So it stood, and it was. Yes, it was all of your. So yeah, so you would dial the GA, which was basically for the area of town that you lived in, and so the first two numbers of your telephone was stood for a certain area. You know, so you would always say it was Twinbrook 9427 or something. You know, the next numbers, and then after they ran out of those numbers, of course, then you had to go to area codes, and then we had enough area codes to do until about 19. When was it that we had to get some more? I think it was around 1984 that we ran out of area codes, because the area codes had to be a certain number. You couldn't, like for instance, a 513. You didn't have a 514 because the numbers, the telephone numbers, all of the numbers had to be a certain algorithm to fit just right. I know all about this because I did billing for the telephone company and stuff. And so then, so you had certain areas of the country was this, and then we started getting more phones and more numbers, and then you started getting mobile numbers, and now you really have to expand it. And now you no longer can take an area code and figure out where it's from. You know, that's right. And that's what we were talking about with Twinbrook 549 or. You know, and everybody laughs at that, but that's what they were. Okay, but so anyway, we're done for the night. We killed Junior. He died. Huh? What's that? Pastor Wikipedia. Oh, I know there's so much crammed in here. Sometimes it's just like exploding. But next week we're going to start talking about what the angels are actually called, like positions, and describing what they do, because so many times we fail to realize there is so much that angels do. They don't just sit around, you know, and wait for certain things. They're also very involved in their work that they do for us, and we'll kind of start with some of those things. Okay, so wow. So anyway, I haven't heard much about what the governor's coming up with and what he's going to do, and on all of this stuff. I know that he basically is trying to make it mandatory And if you haven't seen, a lot of the stores and stuff now are already making it mandatory. Kroger, it's going to be mandatory all across the nation. Walmart, Sam's, they've already made it, you know, and mandatory that you have to wear a mask. I think it's July the 20th is when most of them are all going into effect and stuff. And so, really, really just pray for this nation, man. It's messed up. Yeah, if you don't have one, yeah. Yeah, it's like, give me a break. You're making me come in here and I'm spending my money. You should give me one of it. You're charging me $1 or $2 for when you can buy them for 10 cents, dude.
Have you seen the price they've got on a box of masks?
It's,
Yeah, almost $20.
oh yeah. And it's, well, see, the problem is, and people don't realize, is that, you're sitting there and you were out of these things. They were gone. And so you turn around and you say, hey, guys, I need you as an industry to turn around and retool everything to make these things. And guess what? They ain't going to keep them in stock. The government's going to take so many of them, but they've got so many now. I mean, you've even got the My Pillow guy is making masks. You know, the My Pillow guy. Yeah, My Pillow. Yeah, My Pillar. My Pillar guy. But all of these places, they had to make it. And the same thing, China had a whole bunch of them, but now they're flooding the market with them. You'll find them everywhere. Oh, but they're trying to recoup a lot of their money. It's. I mean, you think about it. If you cost me all of this money by shutting me down, where I couldn't make a car, but I could turn around and make a ventilator. A ventilator which might cost $5,000 compared to a car that's going to be $50,000. I got $45,000 I've got to accumulate. So I'm going to make that ventilator, and it's going to be more than $5,000 because you need it, and I'll sell it to you. And so now there's an overstock of them, but it's supply and demand. And then so I've got all of these, so I can't tell people they can't use them. So everybody's got to have one. Whatever. It's like, whatever. Come, Lord Jesus, come. That's all I can say. Is get me out of this place. It's going nuts. I've never seen, and the arguments of people anymore, they don't even make sense. It's like you can't discuss anything with anybody. They yell and scream and holler, and they just try to beat you down. Yep. So we come back Sunday, and I was sharing with Diana. Our attendance this week was up quite well over the week before.